Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez flew all the way to Germany with one specific, highly publicized goal in mind: to publicly humiliate Marco Rubio on the world stage. But instead, she walked blindly, confidently, and with a smug smile on her face, straight into a devastating trap built entirely out of her own staggering arrogance and a profound lack of basic historical knowledge. There is a room in Munich where the most powerful and influential people on the face of the earth gather every single year. They call it the Munich Security Conference. This is not a venue for political amateurs, and it is certainly not a place for cheap domestic point scoring. It is an institution with decades of history, born in the aftermath of global conflicts, designed as a forum where presidents, prime ministers, military generals, intelligence directors, and secretaries of state sit down in quiet, heavy conversations to map out the future of the globe. The air in that building is thick with absolute consequence. Deals are forged in the hallways that literally decide the fates of entire nations. Borders are discussed, multi-billion-dollar economies are weighed, the delicate balance of global supply chains is debated, and the terrifying reality of global warfare is treated with the dead serious gravity it inherently demands. It is a place of hard facts, objective realities, and unforgiving consequences. I have spent a significant portion of my life observing rooms exactly like this one, and I have learned over time to spot the fundamental difference between the actual architects of society and the political performers. The architects come to these rooms to build something tangible. The performers come strictly because they need a stage. You know exactly the type of politician I am talking about. They are the ones who fly across an ocean not to negotiate a complex multinational treaty, not to strengthen a fragile diplomatic alliance, and certainly not to solve any real-world problem that affects everyday working people. They come to create a 10-second, highly edited, perfectly lit video clip for their social media accounts. They come for the aesthetics of leadership. They come for the applause of their online echo chambers. Marco Rubio was standing at the podium that afternoon, delivering a measured, heavily researched, and substantive speech about the future of American foreign policy. He was addressing a complex topic: the historical roots of the American spirit, the inherent resilience of the nation, and the conceptual framework of the Western frontier. He spoke eloquently about the rugged individualism of the American West, the cultural phenomenon of the cowboy, and the pioneering spirit that shaped the nation's expansion and character, and in doing so, he made a very specific, factually grounded historical reference. He noted to the international audience that the very foundation of that famed American cowboy culture, the techniques, the lifestyle, the entire agricultural framework was actually brought to the Americas by Spanish settlers. It was a simple, indisputable observation. It was a historical footnote in a much larger, broader argument about shared heritage, transatlantic history, and the intricate blending of cultures that built the modern world. He did not say it to provoke an argument. He said it because it was a verifiable, objective historical reality. But for Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who was sitting in the audience, waiting patiently for her designated moment, this was not a historical observation. It was an opportunity for theater. She had not crossed the Atlantic Ocean to talk about nuclear proliferation, military readiness, or the vulnerabilities of the global energy grid. She had come to perform, and when it was finally her turn to take the microphone during a panel specifically dedicated to discussing global populism, she executed exactly what her team had rehearsed. She did not address the substance of global security. She did not talk about the looming geopolitical threats in Eastern Europe or the quiet, dangerous economic warfare happening in the Indo-Pacific region. She bypassed the entire purpose of the Munich Security Conference and went right for the domestic political performance. She looked out at that vast, intimidating audience of foreign dignitaries, and she decided it was time to put Marco Rubio in his place, to assert her dominance, and to generate the viral moment she needed. She began by accusing him and his entire political movement of dragging the United States and the rest of the world back into a dark, authoritarian era. She called his vision of the world a hollow, dangerous form of cultural nostalgia. She utilized all the correct, focus group-tested buzzwords. She strung together the academic phrases that sound incredibly sophisticated if you do not analyze them too closely. But she did not stop there, because performers never stop at the generalities. Generalities do not go viral on the internet. They need a specific target to mock. They need to manufacture a villain. And so, She brought up his earlier comment about the Spanish roots of cowboy culture. And then she did the thing that she has built an entire, massively lucrative political career on. She laughed. I want to pause right here and dissect that laugh, because if you truly understand the mechanics of that laugh, you will understand everything that is fundamentally broken with modern political discourse. It was not a laugh of genuine amusement. It was that specific, practiced, razor-sharp, endlessly condescending laugh. It is the laugh of the modern, highly educated political elite. It is the laugh that silently communicates. I have the prestigious degree. I possess the moral high ground. I am unequivocally the smartest person in this room, and you are absolutely foolish, backwards, and ignorant for even considering the perspective of the other side. It is a psychological weapon designed explicitly to make the target feel small, to make the questioner feel stupid, and to aggressively signal to the press row that the person speaking is entirely beneath her intellectual level. She leaned directly into the microphone, letting the heavy silence hang just long enough for the television cameras to properly focus on her face, and she delivered her meticulously crafted line. With a smug, unshakable, and ultimately fatal confidence, she stated that she was pretty sure the Mexican people, the indigenous populations of the Americas, and the descendants of enslaved Africans would have a whole lot to say about who actually created cowboy culture. The room murmured in response. The cameras flashed continuously. The international reporters furiously typed down the quote, "For one brief, shining, intoxicating moment, she had done exactly what she came thousands of miles to do. She had taken a completely benign, historically accurate statement, brutally reduced it to a bitter, divisive grievance about race, colonialism, and identity, and strategically positioned herself as the brave, righteous defender of the marginalized working class. She had successfully turned a simple historical fact into a weapon of character assassination. She looked out at that grand room of European diplomats and American elites, completely, 100% convinced that she had just delivered a fatal, viral, career-ending blow to Marco Rubio. She genuinely thought she had won. She thought she had outsmarted everyone in the building. But here is the beautiful, brutal, and unforgiving thing about reality. Reality does not care about your carefully edited viral clips. Reality does not care about your meticulously drafted press releases. And reality certainly does not care about your unearned, performative confidence. You can play a room, you can manipulate a crowd, you can hire a dozen expensive public relations consultants to write your applause lines, and you can generate 1 million likes on the internet within an hour, but you cannot rewrite human history just because it makes you feel morally superior. The video of her mocking laugh did not just trickle out. It went entirely live with the explosive force of a carefully coordinated media campaign. It was pushed out aggressively, amplified by her political team, heavily circulated by her most loyal supporters, and enthusiastically shared across social media platforms by a network of aligned commentators. In their minds, this highly curated digital artifact was intended to be a crowning, definitive achievement of progressive intellect, a viral masterstroke that would permanently cement her status as an untouchable intellectual heavyweight on the global stage. They anticipated a digital victory lap that would humiliate their opponent beyond repair, but they fundamentally miscalculated. Within mere hours of the video's triumphant release, the internet did exactly what it does best when confronted with manufactured hubris. It fact-checked her in real time, and the objective, unforgiving truth came down upon her carefully constructed narrative like a 10-ton hammer, shattering the illusion of her historical supremacy. It turns out that when you attempt to use the vast, complex tapestry of human history as a blunt weapon to publicly humiliate a senior statesman on a prominent world stage, you should probably spend at least 5 minutes reading a basic, verifiable history book first. The backlash was not merely political, it was profoundly academic and relentlessly factual. A massive, spontaneous coalition of professional historians, cultural anthropologists, agricultural academics, and thousands of everyday citizens who actually possess a deep, working knowledge of their own heritage immediately stepped forward. They did not respond with emotional vitriol. They responded with a devastating, undeniable, and totally verifiable truth that instantly dismantled her entire premise. The consensus was absolute, crossing all partisan lines to deliver a singular verdict. Marco Rubio was right. He was entirely, factually, undeniably right, and her smug, condescending attempt to paint him as culturally ignorant had only managed to spectacularly expose her own. The entire conceptual framework of the American cowboy, a figure so deeply embedded in the cultural mythology of the nation, did not spontaneously generate from thin air. The rich, enduring traditions, the heavy leather clothing designed to withstand harsh elements, the broad-brimmed hats engineered to block the scorching desert sun, the specific equestrian skills, the intricate roping techniques required to manage massive herds, the complex methods of open-range cattle herding, and even the very vocabulary of the American West, all of these originated almost entirely from the Spanish vaqueros. This is not a matter of subjective political debate, nor is it a fluid narrative open to modern reinterpretation. It is a matter of firmly documented, universally recognized historical record. The Spanish colonizers, voyaging from the Iberian Peninsula, brought the very first longhorn cattle and the first domesticated horses to the Americas in the early 16th century. This occurred long before the United States was even a conceptual idea, long before the English settlers ever stepped foot on the shores of Jamestown or braved the harsh winters at Plymouth Rock. The Spanish were already establishing massive, highly organized, and economically sophisticated cattle ranches across the vast expanses of what is now modern-day Mexico and the American Southwest. The historical lineage connecting those early Spanish pioneers to the legendary American cowboy is absolutely undeniable, deeply woven into the very fabric of the English language. Consider the etymology, which serves as a permanent linguistic receipt for this cultural exchange. The very word buckaroo, which remains a beloved staple of American Western folklore and a romanticized fixture of classic Hollywood cinema, is nothing more than an anglicized linguistic corruption of the original Spanish word vaquero. The word lariat, referring to the braided rope utilized by ranchers to catch fast-moving livestock, comes directly and undeniably from the Spanish phrase la riata. The word lasso, recognized globally as a symbol of the frontier, is derived straight from the Spanish word lasso, the heavy, protective leather chaps that working cowboys must wear to shield their legs from abrasive brush, cactus spines, and unforgiving mesquite thorns. That essential piece of gear takes its name directly from the Spanish word chaparreras. Beyond just the vocabulary, the entire logistical system of the Great Cattle Drive, the specific methods of branding livestock to denote legal ownership, the strategic use of the saddle horn to dally a rope, every single foundational element of the cowboy lifestyle was invented, refined, and perfected over generations by the Spanish and their descendants on the North American continent. The rich, complex, and endlessly fascinating history of the American West was fundamentally, deeply, and irrevocably shaped by these undeniable Spanish roots. To understand the frontier is to acknowledge this absolute starting point. Yes, it is entirely true that these early traditions eventually evolved, transforming and blending beautifully with vibrant Mexican cultures, deep-rooted indigenous practices, and the later waves of American settlers over the unfolding centuries. The West is a magnificent, ongoing tapestry of intersecting lives and shared knowledge. But the absolute origin point, the foundational bedrock of the agricultural and cultural system that Marco Rubio had correctly, appropriately, and respectfully referenced in his speech, was not a fluid opinion. It was, and remains, a firmly settled, entirely verifiable historical fact. To deny it is to erase a critical chapter of human expansion and cultural genesis. Yet, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, caught in a desperate, blinding rush to prove her political opponent wrong, bypassed this reality entirely. Driven by an overwhelming urge to paint a senior statesman as an ignorant bigot, and desperate to score a cheap, fleeting political point for her millions of social media followers, she charged forward without checking her premises. In doing so, she completely and utterly exposed her own staggering lack of factual, baseline historical knowledge. She had stepped onto the battlefield of ideas, attempting to wield the heavy sword of history to strike down her rival, only to tragically and publicly discover that she was tightly gripping the weapon by its very blade. Her own rhetorical strike became the instrument of her own intellectual unraveling. I want you to really, deeply think about the absolute, crushing, and inescapable humiliation of that specific, captured moment. Put yourself in that room. Imagine boarding a flight, traveling thousands of miles across the globe, and intentionally stepping onto one of the most prestigious, exclusive, and closely watched stages in international diplomacy. Imagine standing before an audience of global leaders, looking down your nose at a seasoned politician with years of foreign policy experience, and proceeding to deliver a stern, moralizing lecture on history that is 100% objectively completely false. Imagine executing this maneuver with a triumphant, deeply condescending smile firmly plastered on your face. Imagine doing all of this while simultaneously demanding that the rest of the watching world treat you as a serious, intellectual heavyweight, a visionary leader whose progressive policies and worldview must be unquestionably obeyed and implemented. The sheer disconnect between her overwhelming self-assurance and the devastating reality of her historical ignorance is almost difficult to fully comprehend. It was a spectacular display of unearned hubris broadcasting live to a global audience. But we must understand that the true, lasting tragedy of this event is not simply that she made a factual mistake. Anyone, no matter how educated or prepared, can make a genuine mistake. A misspoken word in the heat of a debate, a forgotten date on a timeline, a mixed-up geographical location, these are the normal, perfectly human hazards of speaking in public under intense, unrelenting pressure. We easily forgive those errors because they are born of human imperfection. The profound, unforgivable tragedy here is the staggering, unearned arrogance with which the mistake was deliberately delivered. She did not approach the podium to offer a different historical perspective. She did not respectfully say, "I view that history through a differently focused cultural lens." Instead, she offered a sneer. She consciously and cynically utilized the deeply painful, profoundly complex history of human slavery, brutal colonization, and generational marginalization, not to genuinely illuminate the truth, not to honor the victims, and certainly not to educate the international audience. She used the suffering of millions strictly as a cheap, disposable rhetorical prop. She weaponized their pain, using it exclusively as a tactical tool to score a fleeting, partisan political point against a designated rival. And when the objective truth inevitably came out, systematically dismantling her false narrative, that beautiful, polished, highly curated mask of moral and intellectual superiority did not just slip. It simply shattered into 1,000 unfixable pieces for the entire world to clearly see, leaving behind nothing but the stark, undeniable reality of her own performative emptiness. The mainstream media apparatus, of course, operated exactly as you would expect them to. They tried their absolute hardest to look away, actively bury the story, and run desperate interference for their chosen political star. They almost always do. Whenever the politicians they actively favor fall flat on their faces in a spectacular, undeniable fashion, the television cameras suddenly, conveniently pivot to point somewhere else entirely. The glaring, front-page headlines miraculously soften into mild, forgiving footnotes. The entire context of the situation is magically shifted to make the offender look like a helpless victim. But despite their best, highly coordinated efforts, the damage was already permanently done. The highly publicized European trip that was strategically designed by her handlers to cement her elevated status as a global, serious, visionary foreign policy voice turned instantly into an absolute, unmitigated train wreck. People across the entire political spectrum, not just her critics, but objective observers globally, were calling it exactly what it objectively was: an embarrassing, highly public display of profound historical ignorance, perfectly masked by extreme, unwarranted confidence. And this is precisely why I am taking the time to tell you this specific story in such meticulous, granular detail. This is the part of the narrative that actually, genuinely matters to your everyday life. I am not telling you this story just so we can sit back and laugh at one specific representative who had a remarkably bad, humiliating day in Germany. This is not just about her as a singular individual navigating a public gaffe. This is really about you. This is about the entire, fundamentally broken system of modern leadership we are currently living under, and the specific type of people who have aggressively, without invitation, appointed themselves as your absolute moral, intellectual, and cultural superiors. You have spent the last several years of your life being constantly lectured, endlessly berated, and aggressively commanded by people who operate exactly, identically like her. I want you to think deeply about the specific people making the rules in this country right now. Think about the polished individuals on your television screens, the blue-checked commentators on your social media news feeds, and the entrenched bureaucrats in the halls of government. constantly telling you exactly how to live every single aspect of your waking life. They are the ones who relentlessly demand that you fundamentally change your lifestyle, that you willingly surrender your hard-earned money in the form of ever-increasing taxes, that you permanently close your multi-generational family businesses during arbitrary government crises, that you alter your traditional diet, that you compromise your personal mobility, and that you completely change the fundamental way you educate and raise your own children. And they demand all of this massive sacrifice based entirely on their supposed, unquestionable moral and intellectual superiority. They look down at you, the hard-working, everyday citizen who actually wakes up at the crack of dawn, clocks in for a brutal shift, pays the crushing utility bills, faithfully obeys the laws, and keeps the massive economic engine of this country running with the exact same condescending, mocking laugh that she gave Marco Rubio on that global stage. They tell you, directly to your face, that your way of life is backwards. They tell you that you simply do not understand the science behind their sweeping mandates. They tell you that you lack the capacity to understand the complex economics of the inflation that is actively destroying your savings. They tell you that you do not even understand the basic history of your own country. They treat your very existence, your deeply held traditions, and your core values as something that inherently needs to be intensely managed, rigorously corrected, heavily regulated, and constantly apologized for. And for a very long time, maybe you actually believed them. Maybe you kept quiet to keep the peace. Maybe you bit your tongue at the family dinner table, or you stayed totally silent in the corporate workplace, because you thought to yourself in the back of your mind, well, they went to the absolute best, most expensive Ivy League schools. They hold the prestigious, unassailable titles. They control the massive digital platforms. They have the loud microphones and the full, unyielding backing of the corporate media. Maybe they actually possess some secret, elevated knowledge that I simply don't. But what actually happens when you finally muster the courage to step forward and forcefully pull back the heavy velvet curtain? What happens when you actually rigorously test their proclaimed elite knowledge against cold, hard, verifiable reality? What happens when you finally strip away the expensive, smoothly scrolling teleprompters, the friendly, accommodating network interviewers who deliberately feed them softball questions, the carefully crafted, multi-million-dollar studio lighting, and the massive, highly protective army of PR consultants? You find out, to your absolute horror, but simultaneously to your profound, undeniable vindication, that there is simply nothing there. You look behind the curtain, expecting to find a complex machine, and you find an empty room. Underneath the relentless, smooth talking, underneath the manufactured righteous indignation that they turn on and off, underneath the perfectly rehearsed outrage and the sharply tailored suits, there is a shocking, terrifying void of actual, functional competence. They have mastered the art of substituting hard, verifiable facts with subjective, fluid feelings, primarily because feelings, unlike statistics, cannot be fact-checked in real time. When they are asked a difficult, pressing question about the struggling economy, when you ask them why your grocery bills have doubled, they don't give you a mathematical number. They do not provide a concrete metric. Instead, they give you a long-winded, patronizing lecture on empathy. When they are asked exactly why violent crime is rising in your neighborhood, they don't give you a tangible security policy. They give you a dense, utterly incomprehensible sociological theory born in an academic lounge. When they are challenged on their glaring administrative failures, they do not accept responsibility. Instead, they actively try to make you feel like a bad, mean-spirited, uneducated person for simply daring to ask the question in the first place. They use heavy, academically loaded words like equity, systemic justice, societal transformation, and cultural nostalgia to build an impenetrable fortress around their own staggering ignorance, hoping, praying, and banking on the fact that you will never realize they are making the entire thing up as they go along. But you see it clearly now. Once you see the magician's trick, once you understand how the illusion is mechanically constructed, you can never, ever unsee it. You watched her try to casually rewrite centuries of documented human history with a single, arrogant laugh on a stage in Munich, and you watched the relentless, unforgiving truth come back to crush her narrative completely. That specific moment was not just a minor political misstep. That was a profound, paradigm-shifting revelation. It was the undeniable proof of exactly what you have felt deep down in your gut for years. I am here to tell you, clearly and definitively, you are not crazy. You are not paranoid. You are not on the wrong side of history. You are simply watching a generation of political leaders who genuinely believe that performing a job on a television camera is the exact same thing as actually doing the hard work required of the job. They fundamentally believe that looking like they care about a problem is vastly more important than actually executing a comprehensive plan to fix the problem. They view governance not as a solemn duty to the public, but as a continuous, never-ending content creation machine, explicitly designed for their own personal advancement and brand monetization. So the next time one of these polished, highly rehearsed performers steps confidently into the frame, stands in front of a television camera, points a perfectly manicured finger directly at you, and actively tries to make you feel small, I want you to immediately remember this specific story. The next time they aggressively deploy weaponized identity politics, leverage manufactured grievance, and utilize blatant historical revisionism in a calculated effort to demand your unquestioning compliance and your utter, submissive silence, I want you to mentally transport yourself right back to that massive silent stage in Munich. I want you to vividly remember that loud, confident, incredibly arrogant laugh echoing off the walls in a room full of global elites. And I want you to remember the absolute, deafening, and profoundly humiliating silence that immediately followed when the cold, objective truth finally arrived to collect its overdue debt. Do not ever let them intimidate you again. Do not let a meticulously tailored designer suit, an impossibly expensive Ivy League degree printed on heavy cardstock, or a well-rehearsed, deeply emotionally manipulative speech convince you for a single second to abandon your own basic, hard-earned common sense. They use these superficial trappings of authority to project an illusion of supreme competence, hoping you will be too dazzled by the presentation to question the substance. But you must demand the hard facts. You must demand the empirical evidence, the raw data, and the historical receipts. Never be afraid to ask the difficult, uncomfortable questions that they desperately want to avoid answering. And never, under any circumstances whatsoever, surrender your sovereign voice, your sacred vote, or your hard-earned money to someone who genuinely, fundamentally believes that their own personal, fleeting feelings are somehow more important than objective, verifiable truth. They absolutely count on your silence to maintain their power. They rely entirely on your inherent, ingrained politeness and your natural desire to avoid public confrontation. They build their entire, massively lucrative political careers on the core, underlying assumption that you won't ever stand up, look them directly in the eye, and say with unshakable conviction, "Wait a minute, that is completely, factually false, but you know better now." The heavy velvet veil of the political theater has been permanently lifted, and you can finally see the bare, unpainted scaffolding holding the entire production together. You know with absolute certainty that beneath the shiny, intensely curated surface, there is no grand, benevolent master plan designed to save you or improve your life. There is only the continuous, self-serving performance. And a performance only works, a theater production only survives, if there is a willing, highly gullible audience sitting quietly in the dark, ready to clap on command whenever the applause sign flashes. They need you to remain seated. They need you to remain mesmerized by the show. But it is time to forcefully turn on the blinding house lights. It is time to shatter the illusion. It is time to stop clapping for people who hold you in absolute contempt. If you truly understand what is really happening behind these carefully orchestrated political theater productions, then you have already taken the most important step. You are no longer just a passive spectator sitting quietly in the dark. You have finally seen the strings attached to the puppets. You have noticed the teleprompters feeding them their lines, and you understand the cynical motivations of the directors running the show. If you have felt that quiet, simmering anger building deep inside you every single time you are talked down to, patronized, and smugly lectured by someone on your television screen who demonstrably knows significantly less about the real world than you do, then you inherently recognize the absolute, uncompromising necessity of pushing back. You are not alone in feeling this way. Millions of people are waking up to the same reality, and if you are completely, thoroughly, and utterly tired of the endless, exhausting psychological manipulation that they broadcast every single day, if you are exhausted by the gaslighting that tells you not to believe your own eyes and ears, and you want to actively keep exposing the stark, unfiltered reality they try so desperately, so continuously, and so expensively to hide from the public, then you need to stay right here with us. You have found a community that refuses to play along with the charade. Do not let them isolate you in silence. Subscribe to this channel right now. Hit the notification bell so you never miss a single moment of the truth, because they will absolutely try to suppress and silence independent voices like ours, and we need you to be alerted the exact second we go live with new evidence. Share this video immediately with someone in your life, a friend, a family member, a coworker, or a neighbor who desperately needs to stop and hear this exact message today. Be the catalyst that helps them lift the veil from their own eyes, because the absolute truth always leaves a permanent, undeniable mark on the historical record, and these polished performers are absolutely, existentially terrified of everyday, hard-working, common-sense people who finally know exactly how to wield it against them. They fear you because you are the one variable they cannot control. We are building something real, something powerful, and something entirely immune to their manipulation right here on this channel, and believe me when I tell you, we are just getting started.